Hello, and welcome to Cook County ARPA's 2023 Compliance Monitoring Training. This refresher course is meant primarily for program staff at the program management level. This includes program leads, as well as any supporting stakeholders at the county, including fiscal leads, grant monitors, program sponsors, and any other stakeholders who seek to understand the county's compliance monitoring process. We have three goals for our audience in this training. By the end of this video session, you should understand Cook County's approach and policies for compliance monitoring. You should understand your role and your responsibilities in carrying out compliance monitoring activities. And you should understand the forms, tools, and templates that the county has standardized across all departments and programs to document its compliance monitoring efforts. Let's talk first about Cook County's approach to program monitoring at a high level. Cook County defines its program monitoring process across three areas of program performance: risk assessment, grants compliance, and fiscal management. You can learn more about risk assessment and fiscal management in our other trainings. We're talking today about the compliance monitoring process, and so we're going to focus on these details, but we want everyone to understand the interrelationship between risk, grants compliance, and fiscal management. Compliance monitoring will focus on subrecipient partners carrying out program activities following compliance rules. These compliance rules can be found in the legal agreements signed by our subrecipient partners, as well as in federal policies like uniform guidance that are referenced in those legal agreements. Program teams are responsible for monitoring and documenting its monitoring activities throughout the course of each program. Let's talk more about what compliance monitoring entails at its basic level. Compliance monitoring evaluates the success of the county's ARPA programs in meeting their stated goals and complying with federal rules. The compliance monitoring process is standardized to use guides, templates, and trackers across all departments. Compliance monitoring evaluates program performance at the subrecipient level, so at the external partner level. The monitoring process focuses on things like following legal agreements, meeting deadlines, and complying with federal regulations. Why do we do compliance monitoring? Cook County is a recipient of federal funds from the U.S. Treasury, and as a recipient, the federal government requires that it monitor any pass-through entities, including its subrecipients, that it passes money through to ultimately benefit beneficiaries or Cook County residents. Federal rules require that the county monitor all subrecipients because they are not picked through a competitive process. This is a separation and a distinction between subrecipients and other program partners like contractors who are selected via competitive procurement methods. Cook County's monitoring process is carried out by project team members, typically led by the program lead. The monitoring activities may also have input from department liaisons, fiscal leads, or other county support staff. Monitoring activities occur remotely over video meetings, as well as written communications like emails or letters, as well as internal project team check-ins. Some departments choose to add on optional activities such as site visits with program partners, but this is not a requirement of the county's overall monitoring approach. Finally, compliance monitoring primarily takes place via meetings. These can be scheduled anywhere from monthly to quarterly, and they will be supported by additional document review of things like fiscal document submissions. Each program monitoring meeting will be founded on an agenda ahead of time, and it will be documented in real time with a notes template. Monitoring activities will ultimately be summarized by the program lead, as well as other members of the project team as relevant via a monitoring log for each subrecipient. Let's talk next about the compliance monitoring responsibilities of program leads and other program staff. Compliance monitoring entails 6 main areas of responsibility. First, we'll be conducting regular meetings with community partners, particularly the subrecipients that I mentioned on the previous slide. The process will also focus on answering questions, asking questions of subrecipients, and providing resources to those subrecipients. Monitoring also will focus on monitoring fiscal expenditures, so broad trends in program spending. It will also focus on tracking and meeting deadlines and data reporting requirements. Program leads will document program progress, and regular check-ins. And finally, they will ensure the adherence of the subrecipient with their subrecipient legal agreement that they sign with Cook County. Let's talk about each one of these areas of responsibility in turn. First, leading monitoring meetings. This is a program lead responsibility that should be risk responsive. That means that the frequency of your meetings with your subrecipient partners should be responsive to their risk assessment for the given program year that you are working in. If you are working with a subrecipient partner that has a low level risk assessment, then you can meet with them quarterly. If they are a medium risk level, then you might want to meet a little less frequently, let's say twice a quarter or bi-quarterly. If you are working with a higher risk potential subrecipient in a given program year, then you will want to meet with them more frequently. The basic standard is monthly, but you may choose to go more frequent than that if you do so choose. In terms of the logistics of leading monitoring meetings, program leads should schedule regular meeting times with the subrecipient and document it in their program administration plan. They should determine the participants for each meeting ahead of time to ensure attendance by making sure that each of those individuals are included on the program calendar invitation for a given meeting. As an example, let's say if you want to discuss program spend, you would want to make sure that you have a fiscal representative from the subrecipient present for that conversation. You should make sure to prepare and share a meeting agenda in advance with your subrecipient partners. You may also want to solicit questions ahead of time and incorporate that into your agenda prior to meeting. Then finally, during the meeting, you should make sure to note the names of all of the participants in the meeting. So make sure that you take attendance and then also take live notes about what is being discussed in detail and then document any next steps that the subrecipient or the county need to follow up on. Another recommendation would be to share those meeting notes, particularly next steps, via email after each meeting so that you have a documentation of what every member of the program team or the subrecipient will be doing after each meeting. We have several tools that you should be aware of for conducting live meetings. First is the county's official meeting notes template, which it makes available to all project staff. If you have an alternative template that you prefer to use for meeting notes, you should just make sure that you are using that form in a way that can also note the basic fields of information, including taking attendance, taking live notes, including an agenda, and documenting next steps. You should also use your program monitoring log to summarize the results of each meeting. We'll talk more about that monitoring log later on in this presentation. One potential program flag to be aware of is you need to make sure that any critical subrecipient representatives that are necessary to have a conversation, let's say about procurement, you would need a procurement representative present in the conversation in that live meeting. If they don't show up, then that would be something that you should bookmark and follow up on later so that you can complete that discussion. Speaking of discussions, we often get questions about what the common compliance monitoring topics are that should be included in meetings. This is a list of topics that you can find more details about in your program monitoring guide for specific prompt questions and additional details. You do not need to cover every single one of these topics in a given meeting, and in some cases, you don't even need to discuss this in a given year. It should be responsive to the risk level of your program partner, of your subrecipient, as well as to the program design that is specific to the ARPA program that you are helping to manage. Some of the most common monitoring topics that you will almost certainly discuss over the course of a year will be program expenditures and program budget, financial management, practices and systems, record keeping, organization and storage, and the reporting of metrics and program outcomes. You'll also likely discuss project scope fulfillment. So these are things like making sure that you're meeting and tracking major milestones and timelines that are specific to your program. In other more limited instances, you may need to discuss the details of uniform guidance compliance to make sure that your program subrecipient is complying with federal guidance on things like procurement records. You may also want to find out or to ask questions about their organizational capacity, so things like their staffing levels if they're experiencing high degrees of staff turnover. If you have a technology platform dependent program, say a program that requires an online platform in order to intake and to screen beneficiaries, you may also want to discuss the technology platforms that they are using for their grants management or their program implementation. And then finally, if you are working with a subrecipient who has not gone through an outside external single audit process before, you may want to discuss that process as well. If you are unfamiliar with the single audit process, you can get more information on it from your department liaison or your Guidehouse workstream lead. Let's talk next about asking questions and providing resources. Most obviously, this will occur within your formal program monitoring meeting, but it may also take place over email, over phone calls, or over written communications. You want to make sure that you have a paper trail for any of the resources that you provide to your subrecipient partner. And if they're asking critical questions that signal any importance for the overall program design, you should make sure that you're documenting that in your monitoring log. Make sure that you leave time for question and answers in your formal monitoring meetings, and also make sure that you are soliciting questions ahead of time, ahead of your live meetings, and incorporating them into your meeting notes. Ask your partner for program updates and unique challenges, and then document any resources that you provide to them after their meetings. Some tools and resources to be aware of. The county has resources summarizing uniform guidance, including an additional program training recording and summary documents that your department liaison or your workstream lead contact can provide to you. You also have your monitoring notes template, as well as the members of your COTS team, that's your compliance oversight and technical support team, who are available to provide resources and guidance in how to answer questions, how to ask them, and how to provide resources to subrecipients. Some program flags to be aware of. Make sure that you're thinking if critical questions cannot be answered in a given meeting or over email due to staffing gaps or due to some other gap in subrecipient capacity. Make sure that you know the reason for that and that you can document why that might be happening and then follow up on it appropriately. If your subrecipient is not providing detailed updates, that's something else to follow up on to make sure that you're not leaving any critical questions that you need answers for go unanswered. Let's talk next about monitoring expenditures. This is another program lead responsibility. It includes a monthly review of expense summary submissions that will be submitted via your subrecipient. Program leads will be responsible for tracking and monitoring expense trends over the program life, as well as ensuring that that spending within your program aligns with the original program budget roughly. You should make sure that you're discussing spending trends with your team in internal meetings, as well as with your subrecipient partners to ensure that program milestones are taking place and that program spending is occurring in roughly the way that you originally envisioned for your program. And if it sees major departures or major deviations from the original budget, that you're documenting the reasons for that change and making the appropriate budget revisions. Finally, you should make sure that you're storing fiscal reports on SharePoint so that you have a very clear paper trail laid out that you or any other program stakeholders within the county can access if need be. Some tools and resources to be aware of for monitoring program expenditures include using your program budget tracker and also referencing the county's financial management manual. This is the policy for fiscal management that the county has established and adopted for all ARPA programs. A couple of program flags to be aware of. If your subrecipient turns in late or incomplete reports, that would be an item to follow up on. As well, if the program spends significantly different from the program budget, that would be a reconciliation that you should make sure that you are documenting. Let's talk next about tracking deadlines and data. This is another program team responsibility that hinges on the responsibilities of the program lead. Make sure that you are working to define and to monitor key program deadlines ahead of time. Those deadlines might be unique to your program, let's say a program stand-up date or a program set of deadlines for external beneficiary intake events. They might also be federal in nature, so they might be reporting deadlines that are established by the federal government. In all cases, the key deadlines for a program should be shared and fully understood by both your team internally to the county, as well as your subrecipient partner. Should work with your subrecipient to make sure that they are meeting those deadlines. This is ultimately their responsibility to meet those deadlines, but it is the job of any program lead and the overall county project team to be as supportive as possible and make sure that you are communicating ahead of time on any issues related to program data reporting, risk assessment process deadlines, legal agreement deadlines, and deadlines associated with the work phases of your specific program. Finally, you should make sure that you're collecting, storing, and sharing data reporting submissions within SharePoint and fully within your project team so that everyone is aware of where specific program data are stored, including expense report or any other program reporting submissions. Some tools and resources to be aware of would include your subrecipient agreement template, your scope of work template for the program, your reporting metrics table that is ultimately approved for your program, as well as some internal resources like your Outlook email calendar that you can use both to set reminders for yourself and to communicate on key deadlines with your subrecipient partner. Program flags to be aware of. In some cases, a subrecipient might consistently miss or forget deadlines. If that's the case, you should be following up and documenting the reasons for that and finding alternatives so that you can solve that problem. Subrecipient, if they wind up adding or removing milestones without approval, that would be another area to follow up on in monitoring meetings and documenting. And then finally, if your subrecipient is very far from achieving the KPIs or the key performance indicators or program goals established at the beginning of the program, that would merit a conversation to see if those goals were realistic in the first place and if they should be revised or if there are other challenges keeping a subrecipient from meeting its program goals. Documenting program progress is another area of responsibility for project teams and program leads. You should understand and communicate the outcomes and successes of your program. You are ultimately the first on the ground to understand all of the fantastic work that your program is doing. And so it's really helpful if you can make sure that everyone within your department, including decision makers and stakeholders higher up in county leadership, understand all of those outcomes and wins that your program is seeing. You should keep your full team updated on program progress and any needs that arise either for your subrecipient or internally for your program team. You should also reflect with your subrecipient on how you can improve the program, particularly based off of things like their reporting metrics. That's an opportunity for shared learning and for growth on all sides. You should summarize your notes after meetings with next steps and goals. That will be another mechanism to ensure that your subrecipients are improving and always learning and making sure to improve their program. And finally, you should follow up with opportunities for improvement. So any external resources that you can provide, any shared goals that you can pursue as a team, you should make sure that you are following up on those. Some tools and resources to be aware of in order to document your program progress. Your program administration plan will be a key source for documenting any program wins throughout the lifetime of a program, as well as your monitoring log for any challenges that occur that your team ultimately addresses. Some program flags to be aware of. One would be if your subrecipient misses major milestones or goals regularly. That should be part of a conversation that takes place in your monitoring meetings to address. Your program outreach, if it is minimal or if it neglects key populations, that might be another area for growth or improvement for your program. And finally, if the goals for your program are underdeveloped or if they change without documentation, that would be an area where you should assess, have a conversation with your subrecipient, and making sure that you have a very clear paper trail, a very clear shared understanding of what the goals for your program are so that everyone can pursue them together. The final area of compliance monitoring responsibility for Cook County subrecipients and program leads will hinge on your subrecipient agreement. You should make sure that you compare program implementation to the scope of work that was originally defined for your program. You should check in with your subrecipient on that scope of work for a shared understanding of how the program should operate in real life, and you should make sure that you are ensuring compliance with federal requirements in the agreement. There is a summary in your legal agreement of key provisions of uniform guidance that should be followed by your program subrecipient partners. However, if they need more details, then that's always a great resource that you can provide for them. Ultimately, you should ensure that they are following all relevant provisions of uniform guidance. And if you have questions about that, please reach out to your COTS team for support or to the OOP legal team. That's another fantastic resource for any questions about legal agreements. You can also reach them via your COTS team legal supports. Make sure to refamiliarize the subrecipient on a regular basis of their pass-through requirements and to make sure that they understand that the use of funds requirements that are associated with their American Rescue Plan grant that they receive from Cook County ultimately hinge on following uniform guidance and Treasury regulations. Some program flags to be aware of. If your subrecipient is unaware of the requirements in their agreement, that might be a good opportunity for you to reshare that link and make sure that they can read through it again, see if it raises any questions. Additionally, any critical questions that go unanswered by program staff should be addressed. We don't want to make sure that there's any kind of a paper trail of email questions or questions in program notes after monitoring meetings that don't get resolved. Finally, let's talk about the compliance monitoring tools that every program team uses to carry out these program monitoring responsibilities. Before we jump into the tools, I first want to note that the compliance monitoring guide that the county has established provides additional detail on how to conduct monitoring activities. It includes information for program managers, including on subrecipient monitoring objectives, guidance on common monitoring topics, as well as questions to help guide your monitoring meetings. You can find this document stored on SharePoint under the ARPA Tools, Templates, and Resources folder in the subfolder number 9, Program Monitoring. Let's look at the tools themselves. There are 3 compliance monitoring tools that every Cook County project team should be aware of and use regularly in their monitoring process with subrecipients. The first is the program monitoring plan. These are 3 slides that are included in your program administration plan PowerPoint deck. This is stored on SharePoint. Your meeting notes template is another guidance tool that can be used as an optional resource. If you prefer to use your own monitoring notes template, you should make sure that you use one that can document meeting dates and attendees, summarizes discussion topics, and documents next steps, action items, and documentation links. Finally, your program monitoring log is an invaluable resource that you can use to summarize and have a centralized paper trail for all of your monitoring activities. This is used by both program leads as well as support from department liaisons and is used to maintain a program monitoring log for all subrecipients, documenting regular check-ins as well as quarterly reviews. It should include things like your program monitoring approach, documentation for your meetings, your dates, and the attendees for those meetings, a summary of discussion topics, and a summary of next steps, action items, and documentation links. Let's look at each one of these in turn. Your program monitoring plan is used before initiating subrecipient monitoring meetings. Project teams should document the approach using 3 customized slides in their program administration plan deck for each subrecipient. So for each of your subrecipients, you should have a copy of these 3 slides custom filled out for that subrecipient. It includes an administrative slide with contact information, yearly risk ratings, and SharePoint documentation links, a scheduling slide where you indicate your monitoring schedule, your internal review practice schedule, as well as project team notes. And then finally, an approach slide, which includes notes on your monitoring topics that you intend to cover in a given program year, as well as notes on topics for your particular program. The base template for your program administration plan is stored on SharePoint under ARPA Tools, Templates, and Resources in subfolder 8, Program Administration, and you should have a customized version of this template deck stored under your program folder on SharePoint. Your program meeting notes template has already been discussed on several previous slides, so I won't spend too much time on it. It should be used at a high level to document the dates when your meetings take place, as well as the meeting attendees with their full names. And then it should show action items. So a filled out tech platform inventory might be one example, or sending August program expenses might be another action item. You should also indicate your agenda for the meeting, and we recommend keeping notes from the live meeting discussion in each section of the agenda that you share ahead of time with your program partners. Finally, we'll share information about your program monitoring log. This is a log that seeks to capture all of the significant monitoring activities performed by the project team in order to ensure that a given ARPA program is functioning in a compliant fashion and is conducting the requisite monitoring reviews. This is where you will summarize any monitoring activities, including your meetings, but also things like critical emails that come through. You might want to summarize those. If you get a phone call that wasn't documented at all, you might want to document that in your monitoring log as well. Every row in your spreadsheet program monitoring log should include information on a different activity. And over the course of a program, it should comprise the centralized single documentation resource that summarizes all of your monitoring activities if any external stakeholders want to look at it. So if any leadership in Cook County have questions about monitoring activities, they would first go to your monitoring log. If an external single auditor has questions about how the program is functioning or the monitoring activities that a project team is carrying out, they would look at the program monitoring log as well. So this is a really critical document and you should make sure to use it on a regular basis. This is the end of this training. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your compliance oversight and technical support team members or your dedicated work stream lead as assigned by the Guidehouse team or Cook County project staff. Thanks very much for your time and have a wonderful day.